Hey everyone, welcome to another Marvel Champions video, and the time's finally come. We've been waiting for this for a while. I think some people are still waiting on their copies. Much delayed, much anticipated. Mad Titan Shadow, the newest bigger box expansion for Marvel Champions, is here. And of course, with it we get 2 new heroes, a slew of villains, and a bunch of new cards to take a look at. So, as I did with Galaxy's Most Wanted, I'm going to be looking at each hero individually in its own video, doing its own review. Today, of course, is Adam Warlock. That's why you clicked on this video. And then I'm going to do a full review of the entire expansion. That'll come a little bit later. Obviously, I want to have more time with the entire box and test stuff out before I give my full review. You can probably expect to see that by the end of the week or next weekend at the latest. But today we are talking Adam Warlock. So this is one of the 2 heroes that came in the pack. Of course, the other one is Spectrum. That video will be out tomorrow. But we're going to take a look at Adam Warlock, and there's a bunch of really cool stuff here. So we're going to break down every single card, and I'm going to give you my full thoughts on what I've thought of Adam Warlock as I played him through the campaign, as well as played him through some of the previous villains and scenarios that have been released. So no more hesitating, no more delaying. Let's jump right into it. Mad Titan Shadow is here. Let's talk Adam Warlock. So first thing we're going to start off with is, of course, his alter ego and hero card. We're going to start with the alter ego side because there is a very unique and important thing we need to talk about, which is his Avatar of Life ability. So this says, during deck building, your deck must include an equal number of cards from all 4 aspects. You cannot include more than 1 copy of any non-Adam Warlock card. So lots to break down there because this is a restrictive deck building mechanic, but also an open deck building mechanic because we've never had a hero that can actually have all 4 aspects in his deck. So this is interesting for a lot of reasons. One, it's going to create a whole bunch of new deck building possibilities. We're now going to be able to look at previous cards in a new light by thinking, okay, they can now be combined with 3 other aspects, which normally was not a thing. As well, though, we're only getting 1 copy of every single card. So that means we're going to have more cards in the deck, more unique cards in the deck, rather than 3 copies of fewer cards. And they're going to come up less because now there's a whole bunch more cards to go through. So there's a few things to talk about here. One, I think that cards like this, I've heard some people say, like the deck building restrictions make it less interesting. And I can totally see that complaint. I think they balanced it, luckily, with the fact that even though it's less interesting to only have 1 copy, and to say you're restricted to this, it also has opened the door saying you can go across all 4 aspects, which is only available to do with Adam Warlock. I also think that for some people, especially if deck building is something that's overwhelming for you, or something that you just find there's too many options, you just can't get into it, you want to play Marvel Champions, but that is something that just you cannot wrap your head around. This at least makes it easier, saying, hey, you can only have 1 copy of every card. You don't have to start balancing. I can have 3 copies of this, 2 copies of this. You just have to think 1 copy, and you have fewer options for each aspect. So if you really like, 7 cards, are compared to, if you like, if you take your favorite cards, it's probably easier to just build a deck with those and have to say, okay, now what am I filling these empty slots with? So I think that for some people, Adam Warlock is going to be a great hero to gravitate towards because of the deck building mechanic. But I just also think that new ways of deck building are just good for the game. If it's not your style to have single copies of, of cards instead of having multiple copies and be restricted in this way, then Adam Warlock's probably not the hero for you. But having options like that in the game, for some people, is important. And for me, I just like having new ways to deck build. So I think that's really cool. The action ability is discard a card from your hand, remove a status card from Adam Warlock. Very cool ability. Anytime you now flip to alter ego form, if you're needing to recuperate, heal, you soul world, as we'll see later, you now also have the option to just discard a card from your hand, or remove tough status cards, or not remove tough status cards. It's the worst thing you could do. Remove stun cards or confusion cards that were, nagging you from when you were in hero form. You can now easily remove them just by getting rid of a card, essentially spending a resource to get rid of it. So very, very cool. And I think you can use that multiple times as well. It doesn't say you have to exhaust or anything like that. So if you had, stun and confuse on and you really didn't need 2 cards in your hand, you could discard them to get rid of both. Very cool. Let's jump to the hero side, because this is where we have a lot happening with Adam Warlock. He has 1 thwart, 1 attack, and 2 defense, so fairly low stats, but he has so much flexibility in his actual Battle Mage action ability that I think that's what sort of makes up for his low stats, and obviously you can build up those if you need. So his Battle Mage ability, I should mention, he has a hand size of 6 on the other side, 5 on hero form, pretty standard. His hit points are 11. So his Battle Mage ability, action, discard 1 card from your hand, limit once per phase. If that card is aggression, deal 2 damage to an enemy. If it's justice, remove 2 threat from a scheme. If it's protection, heal 1 damage from an ally. If it's leadership, give a hero +1 thwart, 1 attack, and 1 defense this round. So There is a lot you can do with this. Obviously, you have all these aspects across your entire deck. You're going to be able to, essentially whenever you have a card that you don't have a use for, or you might have had like leftover in your hand and you're just discarding it, now have a use for it all the time, at least one, which generally you're not necessarily going to you shouldn't have multiple cards that aren't doing anything in a turn. If you do, it's probably because you drew a really bad hand. So the fact that this is limited to once per phase isn't really that big of a deal. Again, it's only 2 damage and it's only 2 threat, or it's only healing 1 damage. But because you can use this every single round, and because of the flexibility of it, having an extra protection card in your hand and just saying, hey, instead of it being worth nothing, I can heal one from Adam Warlock, or from one of my allies on Adam Warlock, is just an extra use for a card that otherwise wouldn't have done anything for you. And healing 1 damage from an ally is obviously pretty good, especially if it gives you a whole other use for an ally that has like big swings attached to it. So I really liked his Battle Mage ability. I used it a bunch. But I also had many turns where I just didn't use Battle Mage. I think that, like, again, because of the way the Marvel Champions plays, you often want to maximize the effectiveness and usefulness of your hand. And with the cards that came in Adam Warlock's deck, you're still often you can't do everything, so you're trying to do as much as you can. And usually that means expending your whole hand. So I didn't often say, okay, well, I'm not going to do something because I want to use the Battle Mage ability. If you've built up his whole kit and using the Battle Mage ability is going to draw you a bunch of cards and ready him and stuff, then it might make more sense to say, I'm going to forgo playing this to use this. But for base Battle Mage without his kit being built up, you're only going to use it in situations where you absolutely have nothing to do with the card. So early on, you might be playing Adam Warlock and think, I'm not using this Battle Mage ability nearly as much as I thought. It probably just involves needing to build up his kit a little bit more for it to have the extra incentive to really prioritize using it every turn, even if it means you don't get to play another card in your hand. So just one thing to keep in mind with him, it is a very flexible ability. You're not always going to get use out of it, and you're sometimes going to feel like, when am I supposed to be using this because I haven't in a few turns? So at least that's how I felt. All right. Very, very cool hero card and alter ego card, especially the deck building. Let's move on to the Adam Warlock specific card. So the first one we have here is a pretty cool ally. This is Pip the Troll. So this is a 2-cost ally with 2 health, 1 thwart, 1 attack, consequential damage on each. It does have toughness. While Pip the Troll is in your hand, he gains interrupt when a player is attacked. Spend a lightning resource and a mind resource, an energy resource I should say, and a mind resource to put Pip the Troll into play under that player's control. So this is pretty cool because he has toughness. So you would have paid 2 resources for him anyways. So the way you can look at the interrupt is like, yes, now you're specifically having to use 2 specific types of resource. You cannot use strength resource, but if that's not a problem for you, if the strength resource isn't something that you have an abundance of in your deck that is going to prevent you from playing this, it's essentially the same thing you would do if you played this a 2-cost ally on your turn, except now you're allowed to do it as an interrupt on the villain's turn to basically throw him into play to block an attack, and he won't die because he has toughness. All it does is remove the tough status card. So you're essentially, for 2 cost, nullifying an attack and getting an ally into play, which is pretty darn good. Yes, that ally is only going to be able to do like a single attack or a single thwart, but then he will get to block again. I think 2-cost allies with toughness in general are just amazing chump blockers. We already use 2-cost allies essentially to block a lot of the time. Having 2 blocks guaranteed out of it because of the toughness status and being able to insert it into play whenever you need to from your hand is really, really cool. So I actually used Pip the Troll a lot more than I thought I was going to do when I first read the card and knew about the card. I got a ton of use out of it. It was super fun to be able to throw him out that way. The fact that you can put it under any player's control is awesome because you can play the ally under someone else you're playing with to block an attack they otherwise might have killed them or might have left them in dire straits. So tons of flexibility. I actually really like this card, and I just like thematically the ability to play it on the villain's turn and just kind of surprise the villain. Even though it's not a player that you get to like see the reaction of them being shocked by this like you would playing an instant in Magic the Gathering or something, it still feels really good to play it. So I really, really like Pip the Troll. Okay, Soul World. This is a really cool card. I remember talking about this in the preview. 1-cost support, response after your deck runs out of cards, place 1 soul counter here. Alter ego action, exhaust Soul World and remove 1 soul counter, heal all damage from your identity. So this is a really good card because you're going to be running through your deck frequently. You're going to go through all the cards in your deck very often. I did that with Adam Warlock multiple times a game, usually, especially if the games were taking longer to beat the villain. I remember I had a tower defense game that just seemed like it was dragging. I think I went through the deck like 2 or 3 times. So you're often going to have the soul counters here. Using a soul counter does not get rid of Soul World, which means you can use this multiple times. You can have multiple soul counters on it and have them stack and just use this back to back if you want. So you're not pressured to use it right away. You do have to be in alter ego form to exhaust it. I think it would have been super, super powerful, probably too powerful if it was a hero action, because normally you go to alter ego to heal. So normally you're going to alter ego and you're healing for 3, I believe, is Adam Warlock's recovery. Yeah. So essentially the best case scenario is you're at 1 health and you're healing for 10 instead of 3. So obviously much better, but it would have been, I think, really cool if the bonus of Soul World was the fact that you didn't have to go to alter ego to heal. I know it would have been too powerful. Maybe then it would have had to have been exhausted and discarded or something. I just think that would have been neat. But still, being able to flip to alter ego and get a full heal just meant that I was basically pushing the limits with Adam Warlock in hero form. I was pushing him to his very maximum. I was taking risks. I was trying to get as low as I could when I had a soul counter on this because I knew I wanted to flip to alter ego, having done everything I possibly could on the hero side, max heal, and then jump right back into the fray. So I really liked Soul World. It's very cheap to get out at only 1 cost. You never have to balance like, should I play this now? I'm not going to use it for multiple turns till my deck runs out. Like I started with this in my opening hand. I felt okay playing it because it's only 1 cost. I knew in the future I was going to benefit from it being out. It'd be different if it costs 3 and you're trying to justify wasting a turn playing Soul World way in advance. But I really liked it. The full heal feels really good. And when you know you have a soul counter on it, you start to play a little bit more risky, knowing I'll jump back into alter ego form, heal right back up to full, and then go right back to what I was doing. So I really enjoyed the mechanics and how Soul World plays. I hope we see more cards like that, make you feel like you have more of a reason to actually take risks that are beyond the risks you would normally take. So next up, we have Karmic Staff. This is a 2-cost upgrade, pretty standard fare. Exhaust Karmic Staff, generate a wild resource. We see this all the time across heroes. They usually all come with a way to generate a resource, an additional resource, whenever you need it. We'll see that with Spectrum in the next video. I think she has 2 of them. So many heroes have this. There's nothing overly special here. It is really good that it's a wild resource because you do have some ways in here, or some cards where you specifically need a certain type of resource. And because he's using all the aspects, it's just nice to have the wild resource and the flexibility of it. Not a lot to say here other than the fact, like most times we've seen cards like this in the kit, getting this out early, I can't stress how much of a benefit it is to have that extra resource all the time. It makes it so that even when you're staying in hero form and you only have 5 cards, you feel like you kind of have a 6th card that's just being used as a resource, so you can always have something to pay for it. So I really, really liked Karmic Staff, but I really like all the cards that generate resources. I think this one's fair, and I think this one is one you want to get out early and use as often as you can. Next up, we have Warlock's Cape. So this is where we start to get into extra benefits, added benefits to using his Battle Mage ability on his hero card. This is a 2-cost upgrade that says after you resolve Adam Warlock's Battle Mage ability, exhaust Warlock's Cape, ready Adam Warlock. So basically now every time you use the Battle Mage ability, you're getting to ready Adam Warlock. Don't get me wrong, this is really good. The problem is that Adam Warlock's stats are pretty low, that if you haven't built them up, really all this is doing for you is gaining you a thwart or an attack. Like you're not getting much beyond that. It's not allowing you to use the Battle Mage ability again. If you haven't built those stats up, it's not going to feel nearly as good as what the text makes it seem like it is. There are some other, that's not always the case. If you have built up those stats, it'll be a lot different. And also, he does come with start with 2 defense, and it gives you extra incentive to defend on the villain's turn, knowing that on your turn, you can use the Battle Mage ability to ready. So you get almost in that sense a free defend. So that's probably the case I use it the most, is knowing that I could defend freely and not have to worry about him not being available. But again, even then, having him Adam Warlock exhausted on your turn never really felt like that big of a deal to me, because all I was missing out on was 1 thwart or 1 attack if I hadn't built those stats up. So it's very good. I just think you'd have to build a deck around Adam Warlock that powers up his stats to make that better than it is at a base level, is I guess the best way to put it. All right, next up is 2 copies of Cosmic Ward. Now, this is a 1-cost upgrade that's a forced interrupt when you reveal a treachery card, cancel its when revealed effects and discard it, then discard Cosmic Ward. This is obviously very good. You can leave this in play. It's very cheap to get out. You can have multiple copies of it in play if you happen to have both, and you're now protected from some of the worst treachery cards. So like, as we know with Galaxy's Most Wanted and now with this expansion box, there are some nasty treachery cards. I mean, there's nasty treachery cards across all the villains we've seen, but especially in these expansions, there's ones that just tend to be very debilitating in some of these really tough bosses. Having this out is just a constant protection around it. You'll have 2 copies that you're getting through your deck. You're going through your deck often, so you're going to see these multiple times. You have ways to get cards from your graveyard, your discard pile, as we'll see in a bit. So you can play these fairly often, and it's just extra protection that says, hey, if something really bad happens, that the worst case scenario happens and it would have caused me to lose or would have put my board in a state that I can't control, cancel it outright, no penalties, except for the 2, the one resource and this card that you paid from your hand to be able to play it. So I really like this card. Sometimes it sits out there for a while and you think like, should I play this now? I don't know when I'm going to use it. Every time you have that really nasty treachery card comes out and you have this in play, you're so thankful that you took the time and the resources to pay for it. It's really, really good. I used it a whole bunch. Yes, there were some games where it just sat out there and I didn't find the right opportune moment to use it. I ended up using it on something small because I thought, why am I holding off on waiting for this, because it's not accomplishing anything. But most cases, in most of the villains you play, there's going to be a nasty treachery card, and this being in play is going to make it completely manageable, because now you get to just cancel it completely. So very good. All right, this might be my favorite card in Adam Warlock's signature cards. There's 2 copies of it too, which is fantastic. This is Mystic Senses. 2-cost upgrade, hero response. After you resolve Adam Warlock's Battle Mage ability, draw 1 card. So the reason I love this is it takes Adam Warlock's Battle Mage ability from being an ability that you use when you have a leftover card to one you proactively use every single turn. When you have both, and I should stress when you have these both out. If you have one out, you still might use them more often, but you're really trading a card from your hand for another card and doing the effect, which is still very good, and you'll still use it a lot. But when it really, really shines is when you have both out, because now you're gaining a card and getting an effect for it. So now every time you discard a card from your hand, you're trading it for 2 cards and getting to either do 2 damage, remove 2 threat, power up or heal an ally, power up one of the heroes. It just seems so overpowered when you get to that point. So I didn't get both of these out every game I played, but when I did, there was one game I got them both out fairly early. I absolutely just steamrolled that game, because with Adam Warlock, I was constantly drawing to the cards I needed. If I ever had a bad hand, I was able to trade a card, get 2 cards, and usually get something I was going to be able to actually action this turn. So I really, really like Mystic Senses. I think this is the key to sort of making his Battle Mage ability the power level you want it to be. Again, even having one out, being able to trade a dead card in your hand for potentially a better one, but have that dead card give you 2 damage or 2 threat removal is awesome. So even 1 out is great, 2 out is just fantastic. I love it. Again, if you can get them both out, don't sleep on them. If you start with them both in your opening hand, even if you can't play them both that turn for some reason, hold one for the next turn. I think it's really, really worth it to get them both out as early as possible. Love that card. All right, another card I love, and you guys know this by now with my big attack cards. I absolutely love them. This is Karmic Blast. 2-cost event, hero action attack, deal 4 damage to an enemy and discard up to 4 cards from the top of your deck. You'll deal 1 additional damage to that enemy for each different aspect discarded this way: aggression, justice, leadership, or protection. So there's 3 copies of this. This is Adam Warlock's big attack card. I use this a whole bunch every single time I played. It's really good. Now, in my experience with my stats, the average damage that I would do with this is 6. I would often be able to hit 2 different aspect cards. I have yet to hit 4, so I know it's possible. I've never once hit all 4 on my 4 discards and gotten the full 8 damage, but just knowing that's a possibility, when it happens, you're probably going to be super psyched, and that's pretty exciting. I've also never actually had only 1 aspect card get hit, which is probably just really good luck for me. The thing to note here is that you will have cards in your deck that just won't be any of the aspects, like some of his signature cards or the basic cards and things like that. So sometimes you just hit a card that's dead and doesn't help you in any way. But generally, you are going to hit at least 1, which means you're always going to probably get at least 5 damage. 2 costs for 5 damage is still decent. It's not exactly what you want to hit with this, but I would say pretty often, at least in my experience, you're going to hit 6. And when you're doing 6 damage for 2, if you're hitting 7 damage for 2 and stuff like that, is just great. It's phenomenal. I was always super pumped to use this, and I always discarded the max amount of cards unless I specifically only needed to deal a certain amount of damage to if I only needed to do 4 damage, I could just discard no cards, for instance, but that's rarely what I was using it for. So I think it's really good. There's 3 copies. You're going to see it a whole bunch. And it just plays into the fact that, again, you want to discard cards from Adam Warlock's deck not as quickly as possible, but you do want to go through them because of things like Soul World. And whether you do or you don't want to go through it, you are going to go through his deck because all his cards seem to, tie into that effect. So Karmic Blast is just going to help that along. Obviously, there's detriments to going through your deck too fast, but generally that's the playstyle that Adam Warlock has. So you just kind of have to be used to it. Again, 3 copies of this, you're going to be doing a whole bunch of damage. And when you do hit that 8 damage attack Karmic Blast, post it in the comments, and actually post in the comments now and tell me if you've hit the full 8 damage and how often, because I have yet to hit it and I want to know how many people have hit it and why I haven't hit it. So let me know. Next up, we have Cosmic Awareness. So this is 2-cost event. Hero action Thwart, very similar to what we just saw. Remove 3 threat from a scheme, discard up to 4 cards on top of your deck, and you'll remove 1 additional threat for each different aspect you discard. So the same thing as Karmic Blast, except that this is removing threat, and you're starting with 3 threat instead of 4, like with the damage you start with 4. So again, on average, I'm hitting 5 threat on this. I find that that's hitting 2 aspects is pretty, common, and whereas the hitting 1 and 4 are very infrequent for me, and it's on the odd time you hit 3 and feel really good about it. But again, if you look at it from that perspective, removing 5 to 6 threat for 2, you're going to be happy with that every time. Even if you have the worst luck and hit 3, it's not the end of the world. If you only hit 1, hit 4, you're still removing 4 threat for 2. I think that's pretty good. So Cosmic Awareness is pretty good. You only get 2 copies of this one, but it is going to be your threat removal for Adam Warlock, and it keeps him pretty balanced, being able to do a lot of damage, remove a lot of threat, which makes him a pretty reliable solo hero, which we'll get to at the end of the video on my overall thoughts. But overall, really good card. And last up, we have Quantum Magic. 2 copies of Quantum Magic. This is choose a card, 1 cost event, choose a card in your discard pile, add that card to your hand. Great card. You're tutoring for a card you specifically want from your discard pile. There's not necessarily always like, this is the card you should be grabbing. It's just no matter what the situation demands, you're going to have a big discard pile. Now you're able to twice in an entire cycle of your deck, grab that specific card you need for this specific situation. It's going to help you on this specific turn, which can't be understated how important that is, because how many turns have you had where you've, had a hand of cards and you're like, oh, if I had just drawn this, or if I just had this, or I'm missing this resource or whatever. It's just having one of these in your hands makes your hand way better. You're allowed to now look through your entire discard pile and say, yes, this is my hand, but I don't have a Karmic Blast in my hand. If I go grab one from the discard pile, that changes everything I'm going to do with this turn, because suddenly I can go on the offensive. So if the threat's under control, you can go grab a Cosmic Awareness. Like, there's so much stuff you can do here. So there's not a ton to say about this other than the fact that, like, yes, you're going to have those turns where you draw this and your discard pile is empty and there's not really anything you can do with it and it's just a resource. But more often than not, you're going to have something in your discard pile you can grab that's going to help you, and it's going to change the way you view your turn and your hand on that turn that you're on, and open up a ton of possibilities for you. So those are all his signature cards. Let's jump into all the aspect cards across all 4 aspects that he comes with in the deck. Okay, we're going to start with aggression. Now, the first thing I'll mention is that there is a trend across all these aspects. So I think every aspect of the 4 comes with a new ally, comes with a new resource card. There's a definite trend across them all where they put like 1 of each thing in each aspect. You'll see as we go. But first one we're going to look at is the ally, of course. You know how much I love allies. This is Marvel Boy, a 2-cost ally with 2 health, 0 thwart, 2 attack, 1 consequential damage on each. Interrupt: when Marvel Boy attacks, spend a fist resource, a strength resource. This attack gains piercing and range. So Marvel Boy's okay. 2-cost allies generally are just good because they can they can block and soak up hit for you. With his 2 health, he's basically going to be soaking up a single attack. He can do 2 damage off of 1 swing, which means that you can look at this even just saying at the value you're going to get is at least 4 damage for 2, which obviously isn't phenomenal or anything, but at least that's not awful. But on top of that, the piercing and the range is sort of the added benefit there. You do have to spend a strength resource, but sometimes you'll really need range to avoid retaliate, or you'll really need piercing so to get through the status card and stuff. So he is situational. It's not always going to work. I just found that in the games I played, I often used him as just a chump block or just a resource to pay for something else. I didn't get a ton of use out of Marvel Boy, but just because I didn't get that use out of my games doesn't mean he's not good. It's just my experience running through the campaign and playing with him against a couple different villains as well. So okay ally, nothing to write home about. We've seen a lot of crazier allies recently than Marvel Boy, but always cool to get a new one. Next up, we have the In-Betweener. So this is a 2-cost event, Action, shuffle this card into the encounter deck. We're going to get one of these for each aspect, I believe, without looking. So it's going to have the blue back on it, so that's why it says without looking. You don't want to see if it ends up on top or where it ends up in it. You are going to kind of be able to anticipate it coming. Everyone's deck kind of slides a little bit when they're drawing cards. You're not going to be able to really avoid that, but you are going to shuffle this into the encounter deck, and when it's revealed, deal 2 damage to the villain and remove this card from the game. This effect cannot be canceled. You will not get this back in your discard pile. That will be the one-time use out of it. And it basically takes the place of an encounter card you would have drawn. So these are interesting. We do get one of these for every single aspect. I'm going to talk a little bit about them here, and I'll talk probably less about them in the other aspects when we get to those versions. But I honestly didn't use these as much as I thought I was going to use them. You don't know when these cards are going to come up in the encounter deck unless it's low on cards. It could come up to, as a boost card. It could come up as an actual encounter card that you're drawing. When it comes up and it's an encounter card, it's phenomenal because it eliminates an entire bad thing from happening and gives you, in this case, 2 damage to the villain, which, yeah, that's not a lot, but it's a lot better than the encounter card you would have drawn. So that's honestly the best thing about it is it blocks an encounter card. When it comes up as a boost card, it's still good, but it's not usually nearly as good as when it blocks an entire encounter card. And the fact that you're paying 3 cards for this, so 2 resources and this card itself, that's at least half your hand, if not more, that you're playing for the potential to block something down the road that you don't know exactly when it's going to come up. It might come up at the most opportune time. It might come up when you're like, actually, I was in a completely fine state to draw an encounter card right now. So it's a little bit too situational. You're only using it once, then it's removed from the game, so you can't just keep putting it back in there. I just found that more often than not, there was other things I wanted to do with my hand. I would just say, yes, that would be cool, but I'd rather do this and deal this damage now than prevent an encounter card at some point that I don't know when it's going to come up. So that's the battle I had with these cards, is that the mechanic, don't get me wrong, is super cool, and I really like that it's in the game. It just wasn't... It didn't make enough sense for me to play a lot of the times, which is a little bit disappointing. And often I was just forcing myself to play it because for review purposes, I wanted to see exactly how it played. So that was my sort of issue I had with In-Betweener. All right, next up is my favorite of the new aggression cards, but it's pretty limited once I understand why. It's called Magic Attack, and this is 1-cost event. Play only if your identity has the Mystic trait, max 1 per deck. So this is where it's super limited. I think the only 2 Mystic, or 3 Mystic allies now, I guess, is Adam Warlock, Doctor Strange, and Scarlet Witch, I think, are the only 3 Mystic allies, which means that there's only 3 heroes you can play this with. Obviously, that might change as we go along, but even when you play with those, you're only putting 1 in the deck. So it's a pretty limited card, but it's because the effect is pretty powerful. So for 1 cost, you get choose an enemy and discard up to 5 cards on the top of your deck, and you deal 1 damage to that enemy for each card discarded, which means that for 1, you get to do 5 damage. I think only one time used this for less than the 5 damage, and it's because I needed a specific amount of damage to beat a minion or the villain form. But generally, I'm just doing the 5 discards. Yes, I'm losing 5 cards off the top of my deck, but I'm doing 5 damage for 1. Usually there's another attack card in my hand I'm doing, which means it ends up being this really powerful swing turn. I actually love Magic Attack. I'm biased because when I play aggressions with like my second, if not first favorite aspect with protection, and I love being able to do just a ton of damage. It's my favorite play style for Marvel Champions, and doing 5 damage for 1 is just really good. So it is very limited. I understand why it is. It would have been great if we could put 3 copies of this in our deck and it wasn't just for Mystic Allies, but if that was the case, I don't think anyone would not run this card in every single aggression deck, so I understand why. But either way, tons of fun to play Adam Warlock. I don't think I'll ever build an Adam Warlock deck without including this card. It's like absolutely perfect for him. So I will always include it. Awesome, awesome card. And last up, we have the resource card. So this is Audacity. This is a aggression resource card, max 1 per deck. Hero response: after you spend this card, deal 1 damage to the villain, and it generates a wild resource. So you get a wild resource with it guaranteed, and just for using it as a resource like you would for, paying for any card, you get to do an additional 1 damage to the villain. Where this ends up being the best is just if you get to remove a tough status card, off of the villain. We hate when there's a tough status card on the villain. You have to try to figure out where your lowest attack is to be able to remove it, so you're able to maximize your damage for the turn. Audacity allows you to basically remove that status card while doing things you would already be doing on your turn, and just by playing it as a resource. So even when you don't get to do that and you do a single 1 damage ping, it's still better than nothing when you use another card as a resource. So it is good to have in the deck. But again, if you're playing against a villain that often has tough status cards, I think you always want to include that 1 copy because you are going to probably hit it at least once and it's going to feel really good. All right, let's move on to the Justice cards. So first up, of course, is the Ally. That is Quasar. I'm so bad with pronunciations. I'm surely butchering this. But this is a 3-cost ally. It's an aerial guardian. 3 health, 1 thwart, 2 attack, a consequential damage on each. After Quasar enters play, remove 1 threat from each scheme. This actually was pretty good for me. I can't remember which scenario it was in Mad Titan Shadow. I haven't done all of them yet at the time of this recording. I think I've done 4. I can't remember which one it is. One of them I had a whole bunch of side schemes in play, and I think it was Tower Defense. I had the 2 main schemes, and I had 2 or 3 side schemes in play at the same time. And I remember hitting this card, and it just felt great. Yes, it's only 1 threat, but 1 threat across everything just felt like that's like 3 or 4 threat for just playing an ally that is going to have its own uses with it. And it's now across all the schemes, so you feel like you're getting like a little bit of balance across what you're taking stuff off of. So I actually really liked it. I don't think it's like an amazing ally. I don't think you're going to use it all the time, and I think it's really dependent on the scenario you're playing in. If you don't have a lot of side schemes, if this is only ever usually removing 1 threat, to play a 3-cost ally that has like pretty regular stats, if not lower stats with the 1 thwart, just remove 1 additional threat, I think there's a lot better ally choices to go for than this. So it's situational, but it's when you're in those situations, I think it's gonna be a sort of an auto include. If you have a ton of schemes to deal with, why not remove 4 threat by paying a 3-cost ally that's going to be able to do 2 attack and block hit. You can look at it as 3 resources to basically do 2 damage, potentially 4 damage, block an entire hit, and remove a 3 or 4 threat across the board. At that point, really good. Why would you not run it, right? So again, situational. It's just gonna depend when you play it. Next up is Living Tribunal. So this is the encounter deck card for Justice. 2-cost event, shuffle this card into the encounter deck without looking, remove 2 threat from the main scheme when it's revealed, and remove this card from the game. The effect cannot be canceled. Not a whole lot more to say after I've talked so much about the aggression version. I think my thoughts are going to be the same across all these. Removing 2 threat from the main scheme is even more situational than the aggression one, because if there's no threat on the main scheme, there's no alternative. It's just you've blocked an encounter card, which is still very good, but it's not doing anything else. So you'll often, I don't want to say often, but there usually will be some threat on the main scheme, especially because you've started the villain's turn and you're drawing from the encounter deck, so you'd be adding threat on at the start of the villain's turn. So unless something has already removed that threat, there usually will be something there, but it just doesn't feel as good if you had a completely empty main scheme, you added 1 or 2 threat onto it at the start of the villain's phase, and then Living Tribunal removes it. It's not helping you tons. It's still good, and again, it can't be overstated that removing an encounter card and getting a benefit is really, really good. It's just, again, you have to balance. Are you going to play it from your hand instead of doing something else? Essentially using half your hand to play it. Some turns, if you haven't built up your kit and have like other ways to generate resources, that's sort of what you're balancing. It's going to be up to you whether you like that playstyle or whether you don't. Next up is Zone of Silence. This is the Mystic card for Justice. So again, 1-cost event. Your identity has to have the Mystic trait. You can only have 1 in your deck. Choose a scheme, discard up to 4 cards from the top of your deck, remove 1 threat from that scheme for each card discarded this way. So very similar to the aggression one, except this one can do a max of 4 threat removal, but for 1. I personally think this should have been up to 5, just like the other one. I think that it wouldn't have been too crazy to have a card that discards 5 cards off of your deck and removes 5 threat. You're only getting 1. It is only limited to 3 heroes. I think that would have been completely fair, but I'll take the 4, I guess. Either way, you're moving 4 threat for 1. Very, very good. It's an easy, reliable thing to just say, I'm going to get this board under control for very cheap, and all I have to do is sacrifice some cards off the top of my deck. The last one I'm not going to talk about, but I am going to just mention I have talked about this card already, and that is because I got Nebula first before this, and this card ended up being in Nebula. So I've talked about Determination. If you want to see my thoughts, jump into the Nebula video. You can use the timestamps. You can go right to Determination if you really want to hear what I have to say about it. But spoiler alert, it's pretty similar to what I'm going to say about a lot of the resource cards. So let's jump into Leadership. So Leadership, again, it's the same trend. We have 4 of each card here, and we are going to start with the Ally. So the Ally is Major Victory, 2-cost ally, 2 health, 1 thwart, 1 attack. Interrupt: when Major Victory is defeated, choose a friendly guardian character and ready that character. So This is also a situational card. This is also one that you're not always going to get a ton of use of. Because 2-cost allies are so often used as chump blockers, like we've talked about, he is going to get defeated, and it's usually going to be blocking an attack for you. Readying a friendly guardian character, you're basically going to play this in decks that you are using a guardian hero, or you have a bunch of guardian allies. A really obvious situation would be you've defended with your guardian hero, then Major Victory blocks another attack for you, dies, and you're able to ready your guardian hero as if they didn't defend and they're ready for the next turn. So something like that, obviously for 2 cost, if you're looking at it as block, nullify an entire attack and ready your character for 2, pretty good. Like that you're going, there's no getting around the fact that that's going to be worth it. It's just, again, because that's situational, because that's not always going to work, because sometimes Major Victory is going to be defeated and you don't have a guardian character to ready, or you don't really need to ready that character. There's going to be times where it just feels like I basically just played a blank 2-cost ally, which still is pretty viable in Marvel Champions. So I think just having the added benefit on it isn't a bad thing, but you're going to have to just decide for yourself, whether that's worth it, including it in whatever leadership deck you're building or deck that has leadership in it, and judge for yourself. I used Major Victory to ready, I think once or twice, but often I was using them as a resource because there was just other things I'd rather pay for in my hand. But again, everyone's playstyle is different. You're gonna have to judge for yourself whether or not it's sort of gels with what you're wanting to do. And if you're even playing a lot of Guardians. Okay, so next up is Eternity. So this is the encounter for leadership cards. So 2-cost event, shuffle this card into the encounter deck without looking. When you reveal it, draw 1 card and remove this card from the game. I actually really like the leadership one. I like the idea that I nullify an encounter card and I draw an additional card to power up my next turn. I actually really like that. I think it's better than doing 2 damage to a villain that might have no impact, or removing 2 threat from a scheme that might already be under control. I think you can always use an additional card. So I really think Eternity is probably my favorite one out of all the options that we have across all the aspects, even the protection one that we're going to see. But again, I still have the same complaints that I had across the other ones. I just think that if I was going to choose one to put in or use, I'm probably choosing Eternity, because drawing that extra card on top of nullifying, not nullifying, but not drawing an encounter card, I think is really good. Next up is Summoning Spell. Super interesting card here. So play, again, 2-cost event, play only if your identity has the Mystic trait, max 1 per deck. Discard cards from the top of your deck until you discard an ally. Put that ally into play under your control. You really have to build a deck around this. Now, I play with, when I'm reviewing a new hero, I generally play with what we receive in the pack, and maybe substituting out cards that I've already encountered from previous decks, but I want to try out the new cards. So I left most of this deck intact when I was playing Adam Warlock, and there's not a ton of really great targets to hit. One of them we're about to see in Protection is the Protection Ally. That's a great one to hit. But there's also a bunch of low-cost ones that I don't think are worth hitting with Summoning Spells. So I think you have to build a deck around this. I think if you're playing Summoning Spell, you have to have a bunch of really expensive allies in the deck, and or at least some really expensive allies in the deck, so that you can potentially check your discard pile, see if the ones you want are still in your deck, and then make the judgment call when is best to play Summoning Spell to try to hit that Captain America, or I think it's Captain Marvel or Black Panther, the new ones. That there's some expensive allies we've got in the game recently in leadership that would really be great to cheat out with Summoning Spell. It would make complete sense to pay 2 costs to get one of those out instead of their natural resource costs. So if you build a deck around it, I think the single copy is going to really work for you. But again, you're limited to 3 heroes in the game currently, I believe, and you're limited to only 1 copy. So even though it's really good, you're not going to see a lot of it. So you can only build that deck around it so much, or you have to other cards to support that concept you're working with. I hope they include more. I think we already have some ways to cheat out allies. I think if they come up with a few more, having a full cheating ally deck would be really cool with Summoning Spell. It might be too powerful, but anyways, either way, really cool card. It's going to just require some specific deck building to take advantage of. And last up is the Leadership Resource card, which is Innovation. Max 1 per deck. hero response: after you spend this card, heal 1 damage from an ally you control. So again, just for using this wild resource to pay for something that you were already going to pay for, you're now healing a damage from an ally, which gives them an fully like another swing with their thwart or the attack, or potentially being able to soak up a hit they otherwise wouldn't have. It's still really good. I think these resource cards are really neat additions to the game, and they allow you to sort of, you know, if you have a deck that has that's leadership and built around a bunch of allies that you want to like have last as long as possible, you're including in the single copy of innovation because you're going to get some use out of it. If you're always having allies in play, at some point you're going to have innovation in your hand, and it's not like you're not going to pay for something in your hand, so you just use innovation to pay for it, and then you get to heal a damage. So I really like it. I think it's going to see some use. I think that might be my favorite one out of all of the resource cards we've seen, because again, it's easier and more reliable to hit that and have it be a big impact, I think. But either way, they're all good. Okay, moving on to the final aspect, which is protection. Again, the 4 cards, you can probably expect the format we're going to follow with these. So the first one, of course, is the ally. This is Charlie 27. This is a 4-cost ally, 4 health, 1 thwart, 1 attack, and pretty simple. He's got Retaliate 1 and Toughness. So 4-cost allies are expensive. He only has 1 thwart, 1 attack, which means that he's doing very little damage. So the whole point of Charlie 27 is essentially to block for you. And the fact that he can retaliate on every hit, and the fact that he starts with a tough status card, makes him a really reliable blocker. This is also the best target for summoning spell in the base deck that we have here with Adam Warlock, because getting this out for 2 costs instead of 4 with Toughness, Retaliate, and 4 health is bonkers good. There's better targets than Charlie 27 in the game, but I mean in this deck specifically, it's the best target. I think it's pretty good. Again, the battle with 4-cost allies is always just, am I going to play them or anything 4 and higher? You're essentially using this and 4 other cards, potentially, if you don't have strength or energy and stuff in your hand, which means that in a worst case scenario, you're using 5 cards of your hand. That could be your entire hand. That could leave you with 1 card that you now can't play with anything else. So you really have to be ready to play Charlie 27 or have the board in a state that you can comfortably use your entire turn to play that. That's not always going to be the case. You are going to probably want to look at other ways to cheat him out, or wait until your kit's built up to be able to play him without having to use most of your hand. But when you have him out, the fact that he's going to soak up 1 hit without taking any damage, potentially probably soak up 2 more hits on top of that, and retaliate across of them, means you're going to do a bunch of damage. You're going to stop like 3 hits. In that case, I think you're getting a lot of mileage out of 4 resources, and it's probably worth considering to play it. And when you're playing protection, those are the kind of things you want to be doing anyways. So it's a good card. It's not going to, surprise anyone or win any like best new ally awards, I don't think. But I think it's one that people are going to find use out of, and it is a great target as in the protection side for cheating out allies with summoning spell. All right, next up we have the Gardener. This is a 2-cost event. Shuffle this card into the encounter deck without looking. When revealed, heal 2 damage from your identity and remove this card from the game. This effect cannot be canceled. So not much more to say about these type of cards. Heal 2 damage from your identity is pretty good. It might help you not have to jump into alter ego form as quick. At the same time, I don't think it's as good as the leadership version. I think the leadership one is still my favorite one, but I think the Gardener is still pretty good. And healing, anytime you can heal damage without having to do stuff, or when you're not in alter ego form, it just potentially allows you to do more in hero form. So in that case, the Gardener is pretty good. But again, all my issues with those type of cards still apply across all of them, unfortunately. Okay, Shield Spell is a great card. So this is the Mystic card for protection, 0-cost event. Play only for identity as the Mystic trait, max 1 per deck. Here it will interrupt defense when you would take any amount of damage from an attack, discard that many cards from the top of your deck, prevent all damage. I love this card. The amount of times I kept this in my hand, specifically knowing that I wanted to keep Adam Warlock in hero form, and I wanted to be able to nullify the attack. I was totally fine discarding cards off the top. I never ran into a situation where I had 4 boost icons come up or something, where all of a sudden it's like, well, to nullify this attack, I gotta discard 7 cards or something. Generally, I was discarding 3 or 4 cards, but it may not, and that damage may not have killed Adam Warlock, but it would have put me in a really tough situation to decide, am I flipping to alter ego or what am I doing on my next turn? Shield Spell just makes me nullify all that. I'm totally fine with discarding the cards usually in his deck. I love it. I understand why it's a powerful card. I understand, just like the other ones, why there's only 1 allowed and why it's only allowed in Mystic decks, but I think it's going to see a lot of use across them because it's just a great card to guarantee that you're going to be safe for that turn. And lastly, we have Preservation. This is the resource card, max 1 per deck. After you spend this card, heal 1 damage from your hero. Not a lot to say here. It's only 1 damage, yes, but again, you're going to be using cards as resources anyways. You're getting an additional heal on top of that. The heals add up when you start adding things up like Preservation, the Gardener. If you're using all these little ping heals, can suddenly get you into a position where you don't even have to think about going to Alter Ego. Top that off with Soul World, which is a full heal. You can really stay in hero form. I guess that's flipping you to Alter Ego form, but you can really do a lot in hero form before having to flip to Alter Ego form with cards like this. So it's a good card. And again, even though it's not like the best card, you're going to be using cards as resources anyways. Getting a free, heal out of that is just a pretty good bonus. So. The only basic card in the entire deck is Martinex, I think is how you pronounce it, or Martinex. 3-cost ally, 4 health. It's a guardian, 1 thwart, 1 attack. Reduce the cost to play him by 1 if your identity has the guardian trait. So this is a pretty straightforward ally. It's a 3-cost ally that can be 2. That's the entire basis of this card. So when you put this into a deck, if your identity doesn't have the guardian trait, I question why you're putting this into your deck. I don't think you ever would. So basically, the funny thing about this card is it's essentially just a 2-cost ally. That's what it is. Because I don't think you're ever going to run this when you don't have the guardian trait. It almost has no text on the ability. You can just look at it as always being a 2-cost ally. They almost could have just said this is a 2-cost ally and had the text could only be played if your identity has the guardian trait. But I digress. 2-cost ally with 4 health is pretty good. You're gonna get 2 blocks out of a 2-cost ally as a general rule of thumb. It's not always gonna work out that way. He only has 1 thwart and 1 attack, so you're not using those abilities that often. He really is honestly just a blocker that you can use twice with 2 health or for 2 resources. So not a ton to say other than the fact that it's a pretty reliable blocker for basic. But I just tell me if you think there's ever going to be a use for playing it in a non-guardian identity. I just don't know why you would choose to play a 3-cost ally with no text just because you don't have guardian trait. I don't know. Tell me if there's something I'm missing there. Maybe if you wanted to run a guardian ally deck and you needed another guardian, I don't know. I don't think you ever would. It's just an interesting card in that way. All right, let's move on to the obligation. So obligation is regeneration cycle. You may flip to Alter Ego, choose exhaust your Alter Ego, remove this obligation from the game, or discard the top 5 cards of your deck. Place 1 threat in the main scheme for each different aspect discarded this way. Going by a rule of thumb, you're probably going to add 2 threats onto the main scheme, so on average. So if you view it that way, and even if you hit the worst on 3, adding 2 or 3 main threats, threat to the main scheme and discarding 5 cards. Sometimes it's going to be worth it to not exhaust and do that. It's not awful by any means, but you might have that super bad luck where you somehow draw all 4 aspect cards and you add 4 threats. It's really going to depend on what the threat level is on the main scheme when you draw this card. But I think that's a pretty reasonable request on the second option for the obligation. I think I could see myself using it fairly often. I think all the times I drew it, which I think was only twice I got Shadows of the Past with Adam Warlock so far. I used the top one just because I was in a situation where I didn't care if I flipped to Alter Ego or it helped me with Soul World and things like that. But yeah, the second option isn't actually that bad. The Magus. This is the Nemesis. So 2 scheme, 2 attack, 5 health, quick strike, toughness. Force response after the Magus activates against you, discard the top 5 cards of your deck. This sucks. There's not a lot more to say about that. It might have just been the games that he came out for me, but when he came out I think I was playing Tower Defense. I was basically on the final push to beat the Sayer. I was at that point where I was starting to get things out of control. Things were starting to get out of control, but I had gotten them so close to being defeated that I just had to basically maximize my damage output constantly. And I drew Shadows of the Past, and he came out. And so I ignored him for a couple turns, and I think he discarded 10 to 15 cards off the top of my deck, and he has toughness, so even if I wanted to take him out, I had to ping that toughness off of him, and then deal 5 damage to him. 2 attack and 2 scheme is pretty good base stats for him. I think overall he was pretty nasty. 5 health isn't that crazy. If you have a board state that you can dedicate using, the Karma attack card, which now I'm forgetting the name of, Karmic Blast. You can dedicate using that just on Magus, for instance. You can ping the damage off with a base attack with Warlock, and then use Karmic Blast and basically kill him right away. So it's not hard to kill him. It's just in my situations, I had a board state that I couldn't spend my time focusing on the Magus. So he's pretty nasty, especially with his quick strike as well. But again, the health is manageable if you have the right cards in your hand. Universal Church of Truth. The side scheme is force response after a player resets their deck, exhaust that player's identity and stun it. The boost is reveal this card. So very interesting the fact that they know you're going to be resetting your deck a lot with Adam Warlock. So they're banking on the fact that you're going to feel okay leaving this out, being like, oh, I don't have to deal with this right now. And then it's going to get to the point where you have to reset your deck, and you're going to basically exhaust your player's identity and stun. So really bad, and it affects all the players, not just Adam Warlock's player, even though he's the one that'll be resetting the most often. So you do want to get rid of this before you get to that point. You're just gonna have to determine when you want to spend your threat removal resources to get rid of it over doing other things. But it's not awful. You can usually avoid it pretty easily just by saying, how close am I to running out of my deck? I'll deal with it when I need to. But they does also add an acceleration token, so you have to decide if you can deal with that as well. But the coolest thing with the Universal Church of Truth is how it ties into the next two minions, which is the Zealots of Truth. So these are 1 scheme 2 attack minions with 4 health. Threat cannot be removed from the Universal Church of Truth side scheme. The boost is put it into play engaged with you. So this is where it gets tricky, because you could say I'm going to leave the Universal Church of Truth till when I can deal with it later on when I'm closer to my deck right now, and all of a sudden end up with 2 Zealots in play or 1 Zealot in play that now I have to deal with this before I can remove that threat. I like how they tie it together, and my question that I want someone to respond in the comments, because there's too many heroes in this game for me to remember. How many heroes have we had that instead of getting attachments or things like that as part of the Nemesis cards, that we've had minions? I was trying to think. I couldn't actually think of many, if any, that had minions instead of like attachments or treacheries. I honestly can't think of any, but again, I'm sure that I'm just misremembering, because there are a whole ton of heroes in this game, and there's tons I haven't played in a while now. So let me know in the comments how many we actually have, if you do know, that actually have minions. I just think it's cool. I like that we get minions added into the deck, and I think it just changes things up from having just like attachments and what we normally see. So I really like the mechanic and how they tie together with the side scheme. I think it's really neat. And the very last card is a treachery, and this is Cosmic Inquisition. Very cool. Insight 2. When revealed, if the Universal Church of Truth side scheme is in play, discard the top 10 cards of your deck. Otherwise, search the encounter deck discard pile and set aside the Universal Church of Truth, reveal it, shuffle the encounter deck. So this is basically discard 10 cards off the top of your deck, or put that side scheme into play, is basically the easiest way to read the text there. Because so much is tied to the Universal Church of Truth, it being brought into play with a card can be really detrimental. And if it's already in play, discarding the top 10 cards of your deck is going to cycle you through your deck quicker, which is in turn probably going to trigger the Universal Church of Truth's ability. So I really, really like his Nemesis cards. I think they all work together very interestingly. I wish the Magus had some sort of tie to the Universal Church of Truth, like in the actual function, the gameplay mechanics of the cards, because I think it would have tied them together even a little bit better. But I guess he is having you discard cards off the top of your deck that it can affect you with that side scheme. But either way, I just like how they built all those cards around the church and sort of all working in unison with it. I really, really like the entire thing we're seeing in his Nemesis cards. So, and that is Adam Warlock. So overall thoughts on Adam Warlock. What do I think of him? I think he is a very interesting hero, especially from a deck building perspective. I think that's the biggest thing. As I mentioned this with other heroes like Gamora and stuff that have these options for deck building, is I think it's just really good when you get introductions to the game that shake up that formula. When you have a status quo in a card game, in Magic the Gathering, these are the 5 colors or whatever. How many times have we heard the conversation, are they going to add a new color in or whatever, which they never did. But I just mean that when you have a formula like that people are used to, shaking up that formula just in a way that lets you reevaluate past cards, I think is really interesting, especially for people who aren't buying every pack. And that's the thing to remember, is that I come at this from a perspective of someone who's buying every pack and has all these cards and every card at my disposal. But for someone who isn't buying all the cards, it's important to make sure that you're keeping things accessible to them. And if you're allowing them to look at their existing collection in a new way, that almost feels like they've acquired something new when they actually haven't. So then by them buying Adam Warlock, they can say, well, I've already used these cards in these decks, but now I've never used them with all 4 aspects together. And that lets me use my cards in different ways or try different combinations that weren't possible before. I love that they are adding cards, or heroes into the game that allow for that kind of customization. I think that's super important. And I think it's just really interesting to come at Marvel Champions from the idea of one card in one copy instead of 2 or 3 copies, and only 4 cards from every single aspect. I think that's just really interesting. Yes, it's limiting, but I think it'll allow for some really, how many combinations are there? You know what I mean? There's so many combinations. I think people will come up with some really interesting Adam Warlock decks. So I'm really curious to see what people come up with. Let me know in the comments if you come up with any that are really, really cool, or some really cool combinations that weren't possible till now between, you know, multiple aspect cards. Let me know in the comments. I think his Battle Mage ability is less good than I thought it was going to be at the start, but it's better than I thought it was going to be when you build up his kit. I think when you get the 2 cards that allow you to draw cards from using his Battle Mage ability, you're essentially drawing 2 cards every single round and triggering his Battle Mage ability, which is bonkers good. I think that before that, especially when you don't have either of the draw cards out, it's just okay. The one that readies him is good if you've built up his stats, but again, if you haven't built up his stats, it's not really as good as the card text makes it seem like it is. It's still good, but it's just not like as good as getting a free ready with other heroes we've seen in the game. But all that being said, I really, really like Adam Warlock. Like, I'm really enjoying playing him through the Mad Titan Shadow campaign. I really enjoy the games I've played with him against past villains. I think he's tons of fun, and I think he's a great a great hero for people to get that are new to the game. I mean, yes, you can't buy him by himself. You have to buy this entire box, but I think that there's cool possibilities for solo play because it's allowing so much deck building. You can sit at home by yourself, build these really cool decks, take him through the session solo. He has coverage across everything, so he's decent at protecting and decent at doing threat removal, decent at doing damage. Maybe not a master at any of them, but good enough across all of them that he has tons of flexibility, and he has crazy damage output with some of his like Karmic Blast cards and things like that. So I think it's a really good hero. I think it's really, really fun, and it's an interesting hero that they included in the Mad Titan Shadow, and he's actually been really successful with my run through the campaign so far as well. So again, if you love deck building, I think you're going to love Adam Warlock, unless you don't want to be limited in any way. But again, every hero is limited by the aspect. This is freeing you in your aspects, but now saying you can only have 1 copy of each card. So it's just limiting you in a different way than other heroes. So I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'm pretty impressed with Adam Warlock, and I've had a lot of fun with him. I like him more than Nebula, which is one of the newer heroes that came out. And again, that's just my personal preference because of playstyle. I could see myself coming back to Adam Warlock a lot more often than Nebula. But yeah, let me know what you think of him. What cool decks you've come up with, how you think he compares to Spectrum. Yeah, just let me. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on him. And again, the Spectrum video will be out tomorrow at the time you're watching this. If you're watching this not the day it came out, it's probably already out. So go ahead and watch that one as well. You can see my full thoughts on Spectrum. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Ton more Mad Titan Shadow content coming out. I'm so glad I finally got it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.